Why did no one notice the woman pushing a cleaning cart when the impossible was unfolding right in front of them? The range was loud, too loud for small thoughts. Rifles cracked the air in tight, disciplined bursts, each shot followed by a breath held too long, then released in frustration. Elena moved quietly between concrete walls and spent casings, her eyes down, her pace careful. That was how she survived most days, by being smaller than the noise around her. 3 months on the base had taught her that invisibility was a kind of armor. She wasn't supposed to stop. Cleaners didn't stop to watch, but something in the air felt wrong. Not danger, challenge. The kind that hums beneath the skin. She slowed near the chain-link fence, fingers tightening on the cart handle, and looked up. Men she recognized by reputation were failing. Not badly, painfully. One by one, trained snipers stepped away from the rifle with tight jaws and lowered eyes. The targets mocked them, small, distant, moving with a rhythm that felt almost alive. Balloons burst in clusters, then survived untouched in patterns that made no sense at first glance. Elena felt a strange pull in her chest. Not envy, not awe, recognition. She watched how they breathed, when they rushed, when they hesitated. She noticed what none of them seemed to, how the wind curled back on itself near the concrete, how the moving targets paused for the briefest moment before changing direction, like dancers waiting for a cue. Someone whispered nearby, 15 today, not one past 50. Elena swallowed. 50 wasn't the problem. That night sleep refused to come. Numbers and rhythms chased each other behind her eyes. She lay in her small apartment, staring at water stains on the ceiling, remembering a different silence. Snow, pine trees, her father's voice low and steady behind her shoulder. Don't fight the rifle, listen to it. She hadn't touched a gun in years. Life hadn't allowed space for that version of her. Bills didn't care about talent. Illness didn't pause for dreams. Somewhere along the way, she'd learned to fold herself smaller and survive. But the range had awakened something she thought was gone. By morning, the idea felt dangerous and impossible and utterly clear. What kind of person asks to try a rifle meant for soldiers when she barely exists in their world? Her hands shook as she approached the captain. Fear clawed at her throat, not of failure but of being seen, truly seen. She learned long ago that visibility could cost you everything. When the words left her mouth, they sounded absurd even to her. Can I try your rifle? The silence that followed was heavier than any gunshot. Rodriguez didn't laugh. That surprised her. He studied her the way commanders study maps, looking for what wasn't obvious. Every reason to say no lined his face. Regulation, career, logic. Elena met his gaze anyway. She wasn't brave. She was tired of being quiet. I've been watching, she said. They're shooting the targets. I think the course wants something else. Something shifted then. Not agreement, curiosity. When the captain finally nodded, reluctantly, she felt fear bloom fully in her chest. Because wanting something was easy. Standing behind it was not. As she walked to the firing line, whispers followed her. Cleaner, civilian, mistake. Elena didn't argue. She let them believe it. Because the moment she touched the rifle, the noise fell away. What happens when preparation meets silence, and the world narrows to a single breath? The weapon was heavier than she expected, balanced differently. She adjusted it slowly, deliberately, letting her body learn the shape of it. This wasn't confidence. It was respect. She took her time, that unsettled people. The first shot broke clean. Then another. And another. The rhythm found her, not the other way around. She didn't chase targets. She waited for them. Let them come to her like notes in a song she'd been humming her whole life without realizing it. 20 passed, 30, 40. Her heartbeat slowed as the count climbed. Fear dissolved into focus. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about listening. When she reached 50, she felt the weight of every failure before her, not as pressure but as guidance. They had shown her where not to push. The wind shifted. She shifted with it. Targets fell in sequence, each one opening space for the next. Somewhere behind her, someone stopped breathing. At 60, she felt tears sting her eyes, not from pride but grief. For the years she had erased herself. For the version of her that had almost never existed. She kept shooting. 70, 80. The course revealed itself fully now, not a test of strength but of surrender, of knowing when to pause, when to flow, when to trust. At 95 she stopped, just long enough to breathe. The last shot wasn't fired with force, it was released. When the final balloon disappeared, the silence was absolute. Elena lowered the rifle, her hands were steady. "I think that's all of them," she said softly. What follows success when no one knows where to place it? Applause came later, confusion first, then questions, then consequences. She didn't smile, not yet. Colonels arrived. Protocols reared their heads. Words like liability and investigation filled the air. Elena stood quietly, the way she always had, but this time she didn't shrink. When asked who she was, she answered simply, "I noticed something." That was the truth. Months later she would stand in uniform, her name stitched where invisibility once lived. Training would break her down and rebuild her properly. She would struggle, doubt herself, earn everything. But she would never forget the day dignity chose action over permission. Because sometimes, the quietest people aren't waiting to be saved. They're waiting to be asked. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did her hands feel steadier now, when everything she had to lose was finally visible? The walk to the firing line felt longer than it should have. Elena could hear boots shifting behind her, low murmurs crawling across the range like static. No one said her name. Most didn't know it. To them, she was a pause in the schedule, an interruption, a mistake that would be corrected in minutes. Captain Rodriguez walked beside her without speaking. His silence wasn't dismissal, it was weight. The kind officers carry when they've stepped past rules and can't yet see the ground on the other side. Elena understood that feeling more than he knew. She lived there most of her life, choosing between bad options, and hopping the fall wouldn't be fatal. She stopped at the rifle stand. Up close the weapon looked less intimidating and more honest. Steel, precision, purpose. It didn't care who held it. It only responded to truth, pressure, balance, breath. That comforted her. Sergeant Williams cleared his throat and began the safety briefing, voice clipped, professional. Elena listened carefully, nodding at the right moments. Not because she needed the instruction, though she respected it, but because she knew this was the last barrier between her and being dismissed entirely. Every detail mattered now. As he spoke, her thoughts drifted, not to the crowd, not to the captain's career hanging quietly nearby, but to her father's hands guiding hers when she was a child. Calloused, patient, he never raised his voice, never rushed her. If you miss, he'd said once, it's not the rifle's fault. It's because you weren't listening. She wondered what he'd think if he could see her now, standing on a military range she wasn't supposed to be on, about to attempt something people with medals had failed. She felt a flicker of guilt, quickly swallowed by resolve. This wasn't arrogance. It was alignment. "Shooter ready?" Williams asked. Elena exhaled slowly. "Ready." The first seconds were the hardest, not because of difficulty but temptation, the urge to rush, to prove she belonged. She resisted it, let the world narrow. The crowd blurred into irrelevance. The rifle settled into her shoulder like it had been waiting. The first target fell. She didn't look at it. She moved on. Her breathing found a rhythm that surprised her, not forced, not controlled, natural, the way it had felt when she was young, lying in tall grass, waiting for the right moment. Shot after shot landed where it needed to, not because she demanded it, but because she allowed it. At 10 targets, she felt the first stir of doubt. This is where luck ends, a voice whispered. She let it pass. Doubt was familiar. It had lived with her for years. She knew how to coexist without obeying it. At 20, the range grew quiet. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just the subtle absence of commentary, no more whispers, no scoffs, only counting, silent and internal. The moving targets began. This was where everyone else tightened. She loosened. She didn't track them the way the snipers had. She watched the gaps, the pauses, the moments when motion became predictable because it repeated. Machines always told the truth eventually. Her finger moved with restraint. She didn't fire when she could. She fired when she should. 30, 40. She felt sweat gather at her temples, but her hand stayed calm. The rifle heated slightly. She adjusted without thinking. Muscle memory rose from somewhere deep, older than her fear, older than the life she'd been surviving. At 45, she heard a quiet curse behind her. Someone had started counting out loud and stopped. 50 came and went without ceremony. She felt something then, not triumph but grief. A sharp, unexpected ache, because this was proof. Proof that she hadn't been wrong all those years to feel misplaced. Proof that her small life had been a poor container for something larger. That realization hurt more than failure ever had. She swallowed it and kept shooting. The wind shifted near the concrete barriers just like she'd seen before. Others had reacted to it. She anticipated it, adjusted before it arrived. The targets seemed to slow, not because they had, but because she was finally ahead of them. 60. Captain Rodriguez exhaled loudly for the first time since she'd begun. She didn't hear it. Her world had reduced to vectors and timing and breath. She wasn't thinking in numbers anymore. She was inside a flow that didn't allow commentary, only action. At 62, she passed the best score of the day. No one cheered. The silence was too fragile for that. 70 demanded more patience. The targets layered themselves, movement crossing movement, tempting her to rush. She waited. Missed opportunities passed untouched. Then the right ones appeared exactly as she knew they would. Her shoulder began to ache, not sharply but insistently. She acknowledged it and adjusted her stance. Pain was information, not an enemy. 80. The number landed somewhere distant, meaningless. She would have shot the same way at 8. At 85, the course tested her differently. Long-range shots through shifting heat. Visual distortion that made truth feel negotiable. She trusted instinct over optics. Fired when alignment felt right, not when the image looked perfect. 90. Someone whispered her name. She didn't turn. Her thoughts flickered briefly to her mother, to hospital rooms and late-night buses and the quiet humiliation of being overlooked, to the job she'd taken because it was available, not because it fit. She felt something loosen inside her chest. Not anger, release. 95 forced her to stop. She let the pause stretch, not out of fear but respect. The final sequence demanded a different mindset, precision without momentum, control without stiffness. She closed her eyes for half a breath. When she opened them, the world snapped back into clarity. 96. 97. The 98th target nearly tempted her into impatience. She smiled faintly and waited another second. 98. 99. The final target swayed subtly, almost mockingly. Heat shimmer distorted its edges. Wind brushed past her cheek. The range held its breath. Elena didn't think of records, or permission, or what would happen next. She thought of listening. The shot felt inevitable. When the balloon vanished, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something clicking into place. She lowered the rifle slowly. "I'm done," she said. Only then did the sound return. Cheers, exclamations, disbelief. Captain Rodriguez stared at her like someone waking from a dream. He wasn't sure he was allowed to remember. Elena stood there, heart steady, unsure whether her life had just changed, or whether it had finally begun. Because success wasn't the loud part. Being seen was. What happens after the impossible, when silence turns into scrutiny? The applause didn't last long, it never does. Celebration fades quickly when people realize they don't know what to do with what they've witnessed. Alina felt it almost immediately, the shift in the air, pride curdling into questions, awe stiffening into control. She stood near the firing line while officers spoke in low, urgent voices. Clipboards appeared, radios crackled, names were exchanged above her head as if she weren't standing right there. She was used to that, being present without being included, but this time it felt different, heavier, because now invisibility was no longer an option. Captain Rodriguez approached her slowly, his face caught somewhere between relief and dread. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded. Her body felt strange, light, almost hollow, like something essential had moved out of her and left space behind. "Yes, sir." He hesitated, then added, "You understand this isn't over." She met his eyes. "I didn't expect it to be." They moved her away from the range, not escorted, not detained, just guided. The crowd lingered behind them, buzzing like disturbed wires. Alina felt their stares press into her back. Some held admiration, others suspicion. A few something sharper, resentment maybe. She recognized that too. She felt it once herself, watching others live lives that seemed easier. Inside the small operations office, the air smelled like old coffee and paper. Colonel Morrison arrived minutes later, crisp and controlled, regulation stitched into his posture. His gaze settled on Alina with professional detachment, the kind that stripped moments of their magic and laid them bare for inspection. "So," he said finally, "you're the cleaner." Alina didn't flinch. "Yes, sir. You've just outperformed every trained sniper on this base." "Yes, sir." He studied her, searching for bravado. Finding none unsettled him more than confidence would have. "Do you understand the implications of what you did today?" She considered the question carefully. "I understand that I solved one problem and created several others." That earned her a long look. Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Sir, I take full responsibility for authorizing." "I know," Morrison cut in. "We'll get to that." His attention returned to Alina. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" The question landed harder than she expected. She felt something tighten in her chest. "I didn't think it was my place." And today it was. She inhaled. "Today the problem mattered more than my place." Silence stretched. Morrison leaned back slightly, folding his arms. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My father," she said. "He hunted. He taught me patience before he taught me accuracy. And since then, life happened." It wasn't an answer he could put on a form. He nodded anyway. The questioning continued. Background, certifications, competitions, gaps. Alina answered everything honestly. Not because she thought honesty would protect her, but because she was tired of pretending to be smaller than she was. When it ended, Morrison stood. "This will be reviewed at multiple levels," he said. "You'll be contacted. Until then, you return to your duties." Just like that. No congratulations, no promises, no clarity. Rodriguez walked her back toward the maintenance corridor in silence. Halfway there, he stopped. "For what it's worth," he said, "you did something extraordinary." Alina nodded. "So did you." He watched her go, already bracing for the consequences. The next days were harder than the moment itself. Whispers followed her everywhere. Conversation stopped when she entered rooms she was still technically allowed to clean. Some soldiers nodded at her now. Others avoided her entirely. A few watched her with something like challenge in their eyes, as if her success had rewritten rules they relied on. At night, doubt returned with teeth. What if it had been luck? What if scrutiny erased the moment entirely? What if she'd risked everything for a single day of belonging? She returned to her routines, mopping floors, wiping counters, trying to ground herself. But something had shifted. The work felt temporary now, like borrowed time. A week later, she was summoned again. This time the room was larger, more uniforms, more rank. The questions were sharper, less curious, more evaluative. They asked her to describe her thought process in detail. She did. They tested her memory of the course. She passed. They challenged her assumptions. She defended them calmly. One officer frowned. "You're suggesting our training emphasizes the wrong metrics." She chose her words carefully. "I'm suggesting it emphasizes excellent metrics. This challenge tested different ones." That answer traveled the table quietly. Afterward, she waited alone in the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed. Her hands shook for the first time since the range. She pressed them together, grounding herself. Whatever happened next, she'd done what she came to do. She'd listened. She acted. The door opened. Colonel Morrison stepped out. "Miss Vasquez," he said, "have you ever considered military service?" The question felt unreal. She thought of her life, how narrow it had been, how heavy. "I didn't think it was an option." "It is," he said. "Not an easy one, not a guaranteed one, but an option." Hope rose, fragile and frightening. What would that mean? "Everything," he replied honestly. She was given forms, timelines, warnings, medical evaluations, psychological assessments, training schedules that looked punishing even on paper. That night, Alina sat on her bed, papers spread around her like evidence. Fear crept in again, this time with reason. She would fail, she would be exposed, she would lose the quiet life she'd learned to endure. But she thought of the range, of the moment when everything aligned, of how right it had felt to finally stop hiding. The choice wasn't about ambition. It was about truth. She signed. Training stripped her down quickly. She was older than most, smaller, less conditioned. Her body protested daily. Her mind followed soon after. There were moments, long, lonely moments, when she wondered if she'd misunderstood what the range had given her. Talent didn't equal readiness. Potential didn't guarantee survival. She was ignored again, this time by design. She welcomed it. Ignored meant underestimated, and she had learned how to live there. She trained quietly, observed relentlessly, asked questions when allowed, practiced patience when she was. Failure came often. She absorbed it without drama. At night, exhaustion wrapped around her like a second skin. She missed her old life sometimes, not because it was better, but because it was familiar. Familiarity is a powerful sedative. But then there were moments. Moments when an instructor paused, surprised, when a drill clicked for her faster than expected, when her instincts, once dismissed, proved correct. She didn't chase praise. She didn't need it anymore. She was no longer trying to be seen. She was becoming. Because strength she was learning wasn't loud. It was consistent. And redemption didn't come from proving others wrong. It came from finally proving yourself right. What does it cost to keep going when the excitement is gone and only endurance remains? The novelty wore off quickly. That was the first lesson Alina learned once training stopped feeling new. Curiosity turned into expectation. Expectation hardened into pressure. The instructors no longer watched her with interest. They watched her with measurement. She wasn't the cleaner anymore. She wasn't the miracle on the range. She was a variable, and variables had to be tested until they either stabilized or broke. Her body carried bruises she didn't remember earning. Her hands were calloused in new places, raw in others. Muscles screamed during dawn runs across gravel and dust. She finished most drills in the middle of the pack, not exceptional, not embarrassing. Invisible again, but in a different way. Some nights she lay awake staring at the underside of her bunk, listening to others breathe, wondering if she had misunderstood the meaning of that perfect day on the range. Maybe it had been a moment, not a message. Maybe it wasn't a door, just a crack that closed as soon as she stepped through. Doubt returned quietly. It always did. There were people who wanted her to fail, not openly, Not cruelly, just subtly. They questioned her presence with raised eyebrows and clipped remarks. Accelerated programs exist for a reason. Talent isn't the same as resilience. She didn't argue. Arguing wasted energy she needed to survive. She learned quickly that training wasn't designed to discover who you were. It was designed to erase you, strip you down until reactions replaced thoughts, until hesitation disappeared, until your body answered before your mind had time to protest. That was where Alina struggled most. She thought too much. In live fire exercises, she hesitated, not out of fear but consideration. She wanted to understand the system before acting within it. Instructors marked it as delay, as weakness. She absorbed the criticism without explanation. During one particularly brutal assessment, she misjudged a sequence, not catastrophically but enough to matter. The instructor's voice cut through the air sharp and unforgiving. "You're late. Again." Her jaw tightened. She nodded, reset, tried again, finished the drill under the threshold, barely. That night she sat alone on the steps outside the barracks, boots unlaced, hands trembling from exhaustion. For the first time since the range, tears came. Not dramatic, silent, frustrated. She pressed the heels of her palms into her eyes and breathed until it passed. She wasn't afraid of pain. She was afraid that the thing that made her different, the patience, the listening, was being trained out of her. Captain Rodriguez visited the training compound a few weeks later. Not officially. He stood at a distance, watching drills, his presence unnoticed by most. Alina didn't see him until after evening formation when he approached quietly. "You look tired," he said. She gave a weak smile. "I feel accurate." He chuckled softly, then grew serious. "You're not failing." She hesitated. "I'm not excelling either." "That depends on what you think excelling looks like," he replied. "This place rewards speed. You were never about speed." She frowned slightly. "That doesn't help me pass." "It will," he said, "eventually." His confidence unsettled her. She wanted certainty. He offered perspective. "Don't lose what made you dangerous," he added quietly. "They can teach you everything else." That night she slept better. The next weeks tested her in different ways: stress inoculation drills, sleep deprivation, scenarios designed to force mistakes. She made some, owned them, learned from them. Others she anticipated before they arrived. In one simulation, the team rushed an objective too quickly. Alina hesitated, then rerouted herself to cover an angle no one else had considered. When the exercise ended, the evaluator paused longer than usual. "Why'd you break formation?" he asked. She answered honestly. "The pattern didn't feel complete." "A beat." "You were right," he said finally, "but next time communicate." It wasn't praise, but it wasn't dismissal either. Small victories accumulated slowly. A corrected posture, a cleaner transition, a better call under pressure. She learned to trust urgency without abandoning restraint, to move faster without rushing, to listen even while acting. Still, there were days she felt behind, days her body lagged, days the doubt returned sharp and persuasive. On one such day, she failed a timed marksmanship drill, not by much, but enough to drop her ranking. The disappointment hit harder than she expected. Shooting had always been her refuge. Failing there felt personal. That night she returned to the range alone. Permission granted, supervision minimal. She didn't push herself, didn't chase numbers. She simply breathed and fired, one shot at a time, letting muscle memory settle, letting frustration drain away. She remembered then that the range had never been about proving superiority. It had been about alignment. The next evaluation reflected it. Her timing improved. Her confidence steadied. Instructors adjusted their tone, not kinder but more precise. They stopped explaining basics and started challenging assumptions. One afternoon, during a debrief, an instructor remarked, "You don't waste movement." It was the closest thing to praise she'd heard in weeks. As graduation approached, the pressure intensified. Attrition thinned the group. Faces disappeared overnight, some left quietly, others loudly. Alina remained, not untouched, but unbroken. The final assessment loomed. Multi-day, complex, designed to expose cracks. She prepared without drama, ate when she could, slept when allowed, reviewed what mattered, let go of what didn't. On the first night, rain soaked everything. Cold crept in. Fatigue blurred edges. During a navigation exercise, one teammate panicked slightly, rushing decisions. Alina slowed him with a hand signal. They recalibrated, finished on time. On the second day, a scenario turned chaotic. Conflicting information, simulated casualties, orders that didn't align with reality. Alina noticed the mismatch early and adjusted the plan quietly. It worked. The evaluators noticed. By the final night, exhaustion had hollowed her out. She moved on instinct alone. When the end finally came, she stood in line, shoulders sagging, waiting. The results were read without ceremony. She'd passed. Not first, not last, solid, reliable, qualified. Relief washed over her slowly, then something deeper, gratitude, not for the opportunity, but for the confirmation that she hadn't imagined her place here. Later, alone again, she thought of the woman she'd been, the cleaner who noticed patterns no one else had time to see. She hadn't lost that woman. She'd refined her. Because resilience wasn't about surviving one extraordinary moment. It was about enduring the ordinary days that followed, and choosing again and again not to disappear. What does purpose feel like when it finally arrives? Not as a moment, but as a responsibility. The ceremony was brief. No speeches worth remembering, no swelling music, just names read aloud one after another, each followed by a step forward and a quiet acknowledgement. Alina stood in formation, shoulders squared, boots aligned with the white line on the concrete. When her name was called, it sounded unfamiliar. Not wrong, just new. Like a coat that fit but hadn't yet softened with wear. She accepted her insignia with steady hands. No smile, no tears. The weight of it settled somewhere deeper than pride. This wasn't an ending, it was a claim. Her unit assignment came later. Classified briefings, closed doors, long pauses filled with implication. She listened more than she spoke. That habit had carried her far already. The team she joined was small, experienced, tired in the way only people who had seen too much could be. They didn't greet her with hostility, but they didn't welcome her either. Trust, she learned quickly, was not granted by performance on a range or rankings on a board. It was earned in silence under stress when no one was watching. Her first weeks were observation-heavy. She was the new variable again. Watched, measured, tested quietly. She accepted it. She knew the language of scrutiny. In briefings, she took notes others didn't bother with. In training exercises, she positioned herself where she was least in the way. Not passive, deliberate. She waited for moments when her contribution mattered, not when it would be noticed. That restraint unsettled some of them. One operator, older, blunt, finally voiced it after a drill. "You always look like you're waiting for permission." Alina met his gaze calmly. "I'm waiting for the right moment." He studied her, unimpressed. "Moments don't wait." "No," she agreed, "but they reveal themselves." He snorted and walked away. She didn't take it personally. Skepticism was safer than acceptance. Their first real mission briefing came without ceremony. A remote location, high-altitude terrain, intelligence incomplete by necessity, not negligence. The objective wasn't glamorous. Extraction, observation, precision. The kind of work that left no room for error and even less for ego. Alina listened as the plan unfolded. Timelines, angles, risks. She noticed a discrepancy almost immediately, not in the data but in the assumption. Something about the terrain didn't align with the movement windows they were banking on. She said nothing. Not yet. That night she reviewed satellite imagery alone, compared it to weather patterns, wind behavior at elevation. The rhythm of the land reminded her of the range, not the targets, but the way systems repeated if you learned how to read them. In the final briefing, she raised her hand. The room went still, not hostile, just surprised. "I think the window shifts earlier," she said carefully. "Not by much, but enough to matter." The team leader frowned. "Based on what?" She explained, slowly, clearly. No jargon she couldn't defend. When she finished, silence filled the space again. Someone sighed. "You're asking us to adjust the whole timeline." "I'm asking you to consider it," she replied. "If I'm wrong, we lose minutes. If I'm right, we avoid exposure." The leader studied her, then nodded once. "We'll adjust." No applause, no debate. Later, the older operator caught up to her. "You better be right," he said flatly. She nodded. "I know." The mission unfolded in fragments, long stretches of waiting, cold that seeped into bone, breath measured to avoid detection. Alina stayed still, eyes scanning, senses tuned. She felt the environment more than she saw it, the subtle shifts that told her when to be ready. When the moment came, it came exactly as she'd predicted. Not dramatic, just precise. They moved, executed, extracted. No alarms, no chaos, clean. Back at base, no one mentioned the timeline adjustment aloud, but something had changed. Trust doesn't announce itself. It shows up quietly, when someone hands you responsibility without explanation. Her role evolved, not officially, functionally. She was consulted more often, asked to review plans, paired with different operators to test adaptability. She didn't resist, didn't rush. She accepted the weight as it came. There were nights she struggled, dreams where the range returned, not the victory but the pressure, the moment before the final shot. She'd wake with her heart racing, hands aching to hold something solid. On those nights, she reminded herself that perfection wasn't the goal anymore. Reliability was. Weeks later, the mission that would change everything arrived without warning. The briefing was shorter than usual, more guarded, fewer details shared up front. The tone told her enough. This mattered. The objective required absolute precision. A single mistake would ripple outward in ways none of them wanted to name. Alina was assigned a position that surprised her, not because it was dangerous, but because it required trust, independent judgment, no immediate oversight. She accepted without comment. As they moved into position, weather turned. Winds shifted unexpectedly. Communication lagged. The plan bent under pressure. Alina adjusted, recalculated. She saw the same pattern emerging, the one that had doomed others on the range. The temptation to push through rather than pause. Her finger hovered, not on a trigger this time, but on a decision. She chose patience. The window narrowed. Someone whispered urgency over comms. She held her ground, counted breath, waited for alignment. When it came, it was brief. She acted. The outcome was clean, the extraction successful, the risk contained. Back at base, the debrief was quiet. No raised voices, no congratulations, just nods. One of them lingered afterward, the older operator. "You waited," he said. "Yes." He nodded once. "Good call." It was enough. Later, alone, Alina sat outside under a darkening sky. She thought about how different this felt from the range. No crowd, no moment of revelation, just a choice made correctly when it mattered. She understood something then that she hadn't before. The range had shown her who she was. The work was teaching her why it mattered. She wasn't here to be extraordinary. She was here to be dependable. And in that quiet realization, she felt something settle inside her, a sense of belonging that didn't need validation. Because purpose doesn't announce itself with noise. It shows up when the moment demands you act, and you do. Without hesitation. without need for recognition, just because it's right. What remains when the mission ends and the silence returns? The operation closed without headlines. No ceremony, no public acknowledgement, just a line added to a classified report and a quiet return to routine. Elena unpacked her gear in the same small space she'd grown used to, movements automatic now. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a deep, unfamiliar calm. This was the part no one prepared you for. After the pressure lifted, after the purpose had been fulfilled, when there was nothing to do but exist again. She sat on the edge of her bunk that evening, boots off, fingers tracing the worn fabric of her gloves. They no longer felt foreign, neither did the uniform, but she knew better than to confuse familiarity with completion. The work would continue. Missions would come and go. The cycle would repeat. Still, something inside her had shifted permanently. She thought of the range, not as a moment of triumph, but as an origin, a point where she had stopped asking whether she was allowed and started asking whether she was needed. That distinction had changed everything. In the weeks that followed, her reputation settled into something steady, not legend, not novelty, reliability. People sought her out, not loudly, not publicly, but when precision mattered, when patterns were unclear, when the obvious answer felt wrong. She didn't mentor in speeches, she didn't correct loudly, she showed up prepared, listened, waited, acted. New operators rotated in. Some recognized her story, most didn't. She preferred it that way. Stories grew distorted with retelling. The truth was quieter and more useful. One afternoon, while reviewing range data for a new qualification course, she noticed a familiar flaw, a design that rewarded aggression over awareness. She flagged it, suggested a revision. The change was implemented without fuss. Watching the next group train on the updated course, she felt a small, unexpected satisfaction. Not pride, continuity. Later that evening, she called her mother. The conversation was simple, updates, weather, health. At the end, her mother paused. "You sound steadier," she said. Elena smiled softly. "I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be." After the call, she stepped outside. The sky was clear, wind light. She closed her eyes and listened, not for threats, not for orders, but for herself. The noise inside had finally quieted. She realized then that redemption hadn't come from proving anyone wrong. Not the snipers, not the officers, not even the version of herself who'd once believed she didn't belong. It had come from choosing to step forward anyway. From trusting the patterns she saw when others looked away. From accepting responsibility without demanding recognition. The rifle range no longer defined her. Neither did the cleaning cart. They were chapters, not identities. What remained was simpler, stronger. A woman who understood that silence wasn't weakness. It was space. Space to observe, to decide, to act. And sometimes, when the world is loud with doubt and urgency, the most powerful thing you can do is wait, just long enough to get it right. Because dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't demand permission. It doesn't ask to be seen. Sometimes dignity simply acts. And in doing so, it changes everything.